Good morning again, everybody. Welcome in this DiverIMPACTS webinar, the last one before a webinar summer break. And this webinar is on some results on the adoption of diversified systems and co-design. Oh no, sorry, that's the last one. That's the wrong one. It's about RIO and how to foster trust in co-innovation projects. So Barbara is teaming up with 3 case studies. Also, I see some people present from the case studies. And she will talk us through her work that she's done with the case studies and from her PhD. So, Barbara, can I give you the floor? And
Yes.
Can you introduce what you intend to do with us as a group?
Yes, I will. Hi, nice to see you all, some familiar faces and names and some unfamiliar. I will share my screen to start the presentation and then also introduce what I'm supposed to do. So let's see if that works well. So So can you confirm if you can see my screen, please?
Yes, it's in presentation mode now on the first slide. Great.
Super. Okay, so I'll be today I'll be talking you through a bit of some early results and a bit of an overview of the activities that we've been doing with RIO in the DiverIMPACTS project. So for the past almost 4 years already, I've been working on my PhD project in the context of DiverIMPACTS, and this was task 2.3 of the work package 2, where we've been collaborating with 3 case studies using the RIO method. The idea of what I'll be discussing today is first to give you a bit of a background, both to the RIO method and to the work that I've been doing and why I've been focusing on trust specifically. Then I'll be sharing some first results, and this will be mostly focusing on the first. So I'm doing a PhD by articles. In total there will be 4 articles, and I'll be discussing these first 2 articles, of which one was published last summer, in which I developed kind of the research methodology, and that also, by discussing that, I can also give you a bit more insight in what I've been actually doing. And the second one is currently under review, and that's focusing mostly on case study 19. I think 19, the Swedish case study. And then after discussing those first results, I'll be going into some takeaways for other co-innovation projects, and hopefully that will be also useful to some of you attending today. So let's start with some background. In DiverIMPACTS, we have 25 co-innovation case studies, of course, and co-innovation always consists of a lot of making connections and working together. And as you may know from your own work context, this kind of collaboration, intensive collaboration on innovative and new practices probes a lot of trust questions. And this is something that has been acknowledged in a lot of scientific literature, as well as more practical experiences. And I think it's, at least from my discussions with a lot of practitioners who have experience with co-innovation, it's also often clear that that's recognizable for practitioners, that trust is important in co-innovation. However, relatively little work has been done on how trust is actually playing a role in these kind of contexts, and how you could, and then following up from understanding better the role of trust in these kind of contexts, also, hey, how can you foster trust actually in these kind of projects? So that's the reason that for these past years, I've been focusing specifically my attention on trust within the context of a RIO project in specific, but also more broadly speaking in co-innovation. And the goal is to also, through enhancing this understanding through the research, to also develop some conceptual tools for actionable knowledge on co-innovation and trust. Sorry, maybe somebody's mic was just off on.
I just muted somebody, yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so that's kind of the background of why I'm focusing on this, enhancing this understanding. So practically speaking, what did I actually do in DiverIMPACTS? So I've collaborated with 3 case studies. Case study number 3 on crop diversification to improve water quality stability in Germany. On case study 19 on local legumes in collaboration with the whole value chain in Sweden. And case study 21, crop diversification through interfarms cooperation in Belgium. So in these case studies, I had a bit of a double role, as I said, because I both was advising and supporting them while making use of the RIO reflexive interactive design method, and meanwhile also studying how trust was playing out in these co-innovation contexts. So I was frequently in touch with the project leaders, preparing the workshops together with them, thinking of useful interventions at times, also attending the meetings, and in some cases also doing separate interviews or having conversations with the participants around the meetings in order to answer my research questions more in depth. So that's been kind of the working method. So then I'll discuss a bit more about the RIO method, because I think some of you are already familiar with the RIO methods. However, for others, it may be until now like, what is she talking about with RIO? So this image is has been also shown to some of you during co-innovation workshops that we did in DiverIMPACTS, and it kind of shows the 3 main elements of RIO. So the first one is system and actor analysis, the second one is the design phase, structured design, and the third one, anticipating niche and structural change. What is important is that this is not a chronological order necessarily. So as you can see, that these arrows are actually cyclical, and you can always go from one phase back to the other, and it's very, in that sense, fluid. So I think I see that Anne and Lieven are also present in this call, who I've been working with in case study 21, and they might also think like, hey, we haven't really gone through first this, first that, but rather we've been moving in between those different phases, and that's also very typical of a co-innovation project, because you never start completely from scratch. You're also always within a context in which a lot of things have already happened previously, and you have to really kind of, it's more of a tinkering approach where you are building on what's already there and starting from a logical entrance rather than kind of a preset method with step 1 until 10, for example. However, these 3 elements are important to kind of distinguish, because I would say that the first element, system and actor analysis, very much about understanding the situation and developing a really deep understanding of what kind of needs and visions are actually underlying the opinions and the requests that we are facing in a certain context. The second design phase is very much about developing solutions and looking for kind of synergies and directions that a project could take. And the third one is very much focused on how to embed this into a larger system and how to actually make sure that your projects within the group that you are working with can have an influence that goes beyond that group and that actually affects a more structural change. So I know that this is a very, very brief introduction in the RIO method, but there's already been also a previous webinar that Daniel probably also recorded and stored somewhere that also explains in more detail the RIO method. But I think for now, this is kind of sufficient to understand the rest of my presentation. And in case anyone needs some clarification, please just raise your hand or interrupt me, and I'll be happy to answer. Okay. All right, so moving on to the second part of the presentation is the first results of my work here in DiverIMPACTS. And my first kind of harvest, or my first result, is actually a more theoretical or methodological result, because my first article really focused on developing a way to study trust in this context. And this has to do with what I previously explained, is that until now, in much literature on trust in these kind of contexts, mostly it didn't really go beyond the fact that trust was important, but there was not a method that I could already take and use to study trust in this context. So this is why the first focus was to develop a method to study trust in this specific context. The first thing that was important was to actually define what my understanding of trust actually is. And that's already something that's, because there's many different definitions of trust. So I've been building on previous definitions of trust. And the definition that I work with in my work is that trust is positive expectations that suspend experienced vulnerability and uncertainty. So some important words are expectations. So trust is always kind of towards the future. And it's also an expectation that you have to at least, you can have a lot of trust or little trust, but when you trust, you at least have a positive expectation. And also vulnerability and uncertainty are two very important aspects of this definition, because in case you always need to have something to lose, so to say. So you need to be vulnerable in order for trust to be necessary, because when you don't have anything to lose, there's no interest to trust. We're not talking about trust. And also there needs to be some uncertainty about the future, because in the case you would be 100% sure, you would just know, you wouldn't need to trust. So this is important, because through defining, we can then, of course, develop a method. An important question that I'm asking in my research is, how do these positive expectations that trust consists of, how do these actually emerge in co-innovation contexts? So going on with, continuing with developing a method to study the role of trust. So the question of how is trust important in these RIO or co-innovation projects? What I did is that I took a lot of inspiration and I did a lot of research into trust theory and previous work in other fields on trust, and tried to see how can I translate these insights that are already there and that many people have been working on for a long time to this specific context, and what is unique or what is special about this context that we need to take into account in order to be able to study and say something sensible about the role of trust in these contexts. So one big measure that I took and is that I distinguished 3 levels of aggregation. Because when you're co-innovating, there's always a room where you're with people that are coming together in workshops and that are people that are collaborating with each other. And on this interpersonal level, there's already a lot of trust dynamics going on, because it may be people that already have worked together before with either positive or negative experiences. It may either, however, in co-innovation context, typically also often be people that have never worked together, because innovation often is about making new connections, as I mentioned previously. And in that case, there's not yet a base to build on for trust. So this interpersonal level in co-innovation, because it's people's work, is extremely important. However, these people are also all representing an organization. And this can be a farmer that is representing his or her farm, which usually consists of more people working there, but also even if the farmer would be representing a family farm, it's still different, him or her as a person, rather than the actual farm that is being represented in the meeting. But it can also be, of course, somebody from a cooperative, somebody who's a researcher that is also somehow representing a body of knowledge and an organization such as a university or an institute. But it can also be, such as in the case that I'll be discussing a bit more, the Swedish case study, it can also be somebody representing an NGO or whatever. This also often plays a role because this person, when real steps are going to be taken resulting from this co-innovation project, will also have to give feedback and to get the organization on board. So this inter-organizational level is important to separate from the interpersonal level. And then the third level of aggregation that I'm separating is system level, because that's usually the object of change. Because typically in a RIO project or in a co-innovation project, the goal is not to just change what the people that are actual part of the project are doing, but the object of change is actually a larger system. And in the DiverIMPACTS case studies, this system can be a lot of different things, because there's DiverIMPACTS case studies that are really focused on one specific region and want to change something there. But more typically, the larger value chain is also involved, or even like a global value chain, or a political system needs to make some changes in order to support the diversification goals of the projects. And this objective change on the system level, also a lot of things can happen, as we will see when I'm discussing my empirical results, that influence what is happening inside of the co-innovation projects. So this separation is represented here in this framework that I have developed in my first article to study the role of trust in this context. So I separate between this interpersonal level, inter-organizational level, and system level of aggregation. And this is also, this is not to say that these are not influencing each other, because they're actually influencing each other a lot. But in order for me to be able in the research to make this separation and to also see where do I look for trust and to not confuse different dynamics with each other. So it's more kind of a lens to look through that assists in how can I actually understand this context. I want to repeat, because I know I'm going into a lot of theory and quite abstract talk in this part of the presentation. So please interrupt me when anything is unclear or if you do not follow, because I'm happy to explain it in more detail. So these levels of aggregation are important. And then there's these other two words that were so important in the definition of trust: vulnerability and uncertainty. Because as I said, without an experience of vulnerability and an experience of uncertainty, there's actually no need to trust. So this is why in this search heuristic, in this lens that I use to study trust in these three case studies, and that could be used for other co-innovation contexts as well, I'd make the separation also between vulnerability and uncertainty. So right now, please don't read all of these questions because it's a lot, but I have also formulated questions that you can ask in order to really see, hey, what is happening on this level? What is happening on this level, in order to use this lens. So quickly go to the next slide. So that was the theoretical methodological parts. Now we'll go to an empirical application in case study 19. Which is focused on local legumes in Skåne, the southernmost province of Sweden. And this is a case study that, as all DiverIMPACTS case studies, focuses on diversification, but in this case specifically on the promotion of incorporating more local legumes in the crop rotations in the region, as well as in the local consumption patterns in the region. So this was a case study that's bringing together a lot of different actors from different backgrounds, such as farmers, researchers, but also somebody from a food cooperative, a large Swedish environmental NGO, and really to try to tackle this problem from a lot of different angles. One thing that was quite logical at the start of the project was that there was, at the same time as their wish for diversification through local legumes, a very much growing plant-based product market in Sweden and a rising trend of veganism in Sweden. And it was quite a logical combination in the head of the project management to make this link, to see this as a big opportunity for the project to maybe link to this plant-based product markets. However, this created a lot of distrust and controversy amongst several participants in the case study. So on the first meeting, the first project meeting with already quite a big part of the group that is now together present, this created quite a lot of discussions, and quite heated discussions even, because people were just disagreeing and distrusting and not wanting to jump onto this trend. And this was creating an interesting puzzle, because if you look at it very bluntly, you think, hey, if you want to produce more legumes, then why are you not interested in this growing market that could maybe use a lot of your legumes? So it created an interesting puzzle, and this is what I looked into more detail, and also did a lot of interviews with the participants to understand better each of their own perspectives on this topic. So what I did is that here you see the same framework again that I just explained. What I did is that I looked into what is actually going on here. Why is this controversy? Why is this controversy even there when it seemingly goes against the interest of some of the participants? So I first looked at the system level, and I looked at kind of vulnerability. And one thing that became really clear is that vegan activism is very, in the public debates, on television, in newspapers, etc., is often represented as a threat to Swedish farms. Practices that are, for example, related, like getting a lot of news coverage, is vegan activists that go to livestock farms and that film there how animals are being treated in certain farms. But also there are several cases that got a lot of media attention where they actually went into farms and demolished property of farmers, and also where they released animals from certain stables. So this has been getting a lot of attention, and there's been several very good academic analysis also of the news trends over the last 20 years about vegan activism in Sweden, and they conclude vegan activism is often represented as a threat. So this, of course, creates kind of on a system level this feeling of vulnerability to veganism amongst farmers. Then on the uncertainty level, there's a growing market for plant-based products, which has a potential demand for local legumes, however, also potentially less demand for meat and dairy, of course, in case of veganism, meat in case of only vegetarianism. And in addition to this, also, there's a significant knowledge gap. There's some knowledge, but not enough in the eyes of many on how you actually do organic farming without livestock. So these are some factors that play a role on a system level. What you also see is that the growing plant-based market is often being associated with vegan activism, even though you could argue that it's, of course, two separate things, but it's often kind of put in one box. Then on an organizational level, vulnerability is that activists may, which was also frequently mentioned in the interviews, activists may also come to the farms of participants in the network. So this is a fear that was present on an kind of a business organizational level, and also an economic as well as ecological uncertainty about potentially in the future farming without livestock. So is this actually economical renable? How do you say, can I survive economically with my farm? As well as how do I farm ecologically if I don't have livestock and I don't want to use, for example, chemical fertilizer. And then on the interpersonal level of the actual people in the room present that were having these heated discussions in the first workshop, there were people that were actually feeling vulnerable because they were afraid to say, hey, I am actually vegan, because they didn't want to raise conflict. This is something that several of the participants told me in the interviews. Others, several of the farmers, had a big personal fear also for on-farm activism, for example, because they were also living with their family on the farm. And another related element was an attachment to their animals. And several of the farmers explaining to me that the whole reason that they were doing and loving their job was to work with animals, and having this feeling of vegans are wanting to rob me of this pleasure of, and this important part of my work life. So this was the vulnerability kind of part experienced on an interpersonal level. And then the uncertainty was also about the opinions of others. So in this new context where not everybody knew each other, not everybody also knew what the others actually believed about the role of meat or livestock in the future. And also uncertainty about, is there a judgment going on? And so there was a lot of also on this interpersonal level uncertainty experienced. So that's a big kind of overview of what was going on in there based on the interviews that I had with the participants and the observations in the workshops. And we actually did several interventions based on this analysis, and also using this idea of looking at what is actually underneath all of this. So here you see that this trust lens also helped us seeing what is actually going on and going beyond just the difference of opinions and sketching a much richer picture of what was actually the controversy here and what was actually going on and what were people afraid of, and also how could we go beyond that. So there were several things that in hindsight that we did purposefully, and that in hindsight also had a positive effect. I want to single out two specific measures that were part of a bigger project, but we can of course not go and repeat the whole project here in this context. One thing was that we organized on the second workshop, a chef joined the project, and we organized a so-called food jam, which meant that we were all preparing lunch together. So we made teams of 2 and everybody got a recipe, locally produced legumes and other ingredients, and prepared a big lunch together. This was both a nice way to get to know each other a bit more informally. And also this, of course, on this interpersonal level of, hey, are you judging me? Are you against me? Those kind of experiences. I think that the food jam had a lot of effect on this interpersonal level trust dynamics. However, they also, the food jam was also shifting the discussion from, as some perceived it as being anti-meat, to being pro-legumes, and more showing, hey, this is all that can be done with legumes. This is actually tasty. Look at how nice this hummus from your local peas, rather than the chickpeas that are important from far away, for example, tastes, etc. So it was really moving towards a more synergetic, a direction of synergy, so to say, rather than being, hey, we don't want this. The focus was going more towards, the benefits of legumes. And the third workshop, so this was the second workshop, and then the third workshop a few months later, still within the first year of the project. I think that a very important part of that was that the setting of the workshop was also chosen very consciously to be at the farm of one of the participants. And this was a chicken farm, and the workshop room was actually also directly next to the chicken farm. So this farmer was also already experimenting with local legumes and showing us a field where he was doing some mixed cropping with local legumes, but also giving us a tour of the chicken stable during his break. And I think this also very materially, very clearly demonstrated to everybody in the project that, at least in this specific project, livestock was part of the vision of the future. And that's the expectation of the farmers, to get back to that important word in trust, the expectations should not be that this participating in this project and looking into plant-based food trends, for example, it was the choice of the setting of the workshop showed very clearly, hey, in our future vision, we can have farms that have chicken production, chicken husbandry, as well as growing legumes. So I think these two things together really demonstrated very clearly to the farmers, hey, this project is not anti-meat, and this can go together in the future in our eyes. And it's also very visible that after this first year, also a lot of activity started. And for example, one of the most vocal farmers that was really worried about veganism, then also asked the chef to organize a food jam on his farm, so he could actually spread the message to his neighbors about how nice the lentils that he grew were tasting. And other initiatives like this, and also more further reaching initiatives and new collaborations were starting from there on. So then a lot of activity really came about. So we could say that the barrier that was created by the kind of lack of trust was overcome through these interventions. Yeah. So this was kind of where I leave at the second article and the analysis that I've done of case study 19. I will now move on into this in this presentation to a bit more uncharted territory for me, which is to say it's insights that I'm working on currently. I will also ask you in the discussion that we will have in a moment to reflect with me on this and to tell me what I'm potentially overlooking, but also to say what is useful. At least one clear conclusion from the work in the past years with all three case studies is that I would say trust is not just a natural occurrence in a co-innovation project. So it's not the case that trust is just either there or not there and you cannot help it as a project leader. Rather, I would say fostering trust is a learnable skill. This does not mean that you can always establish trust or that it's easy. However, it is something that is influenceable, as I also demonstrated with this analysis that we did and the interventions that we did and the effect that it actually had. So the implication of this is that project leaders really become this kind of spider in the web, because when trust is so important to actually innovate together and do RIO together, it means that you could imagine a project leader as this spider in the web that has to have an overview and that is really weaving together this web. A very important role. I have here some quotes from project leaders. Some people attending may recognize themselves in the quotes. So I will read them to you. These are three quotes. The first one is, I suggest to start in this region because there are already several enthusiastic farmers. In the other region, people are more reluctant to change. The second one, let's first feel the temperature amongst the farmers and then make further plans based on the temperature. And the third one, making a year planning is important to have overviews of all activities and celebrate what we have achieved by the end of the year. So these are all quotes that are from my conversations with project leaders while discussing kind of strategies and ways to go about organizing the workshops that were coming up. And I would say that these actually illustrate very clearly the three elements that are part of this kind of craft, this skill of fostering trust in this context. So the first one is what I call tacit knowledge, or not just me, that's a wider concept. And it is the kind of knowledge that you cannot learn from books or from studying. Rather, this is the kind of knowledge that you have and that you develop through having worked in a specific context for a longer time, through knowing practically what is going on in a specific context. So, for example, as in this quote, that you already know in which region you're more likely to be successful rather than in another region within your work area. The second one is more intuition. And I think this is the most difficult one to actually influence and to learn. However, it's very crucial in fostering trust. So yeah, how do you actually do that? feeling the temperature amongst farmers. I think it's something that a very good project leader is very good at doing. However, how do you do that? Feeling the temperature. And then thirdly, more formal strategies that can also really play a very important role in fostering trust and that are maybe a bit easier to transfer. So for example, making a year planning and then have an overview of all activities and be also able to celebrate goals that have been achieved. So this is a more formal strategy that also aids the process of fostering trust. So I would say that this craft of building and fostering trust consists of these three elements: tacit knowledge, intuition, and formal strategies or techniques. Whew, okay, a lot of talk. I stayed more or less around half an hour what I planned to talk. So I hope I haven't lost you too much on the way. And I would first like to open the floor before we go into discussion that I prepared to see if there's any questions of clarification or critiques based on what I've told so far. Yes, Rowan.
Hi, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I was just wondering, with your clarification, with the framework you use, where you look at sort of vulnerability and uncertainty on 3 different levels, can that only be applied to, say, one controversy at a time, or can it sort of look at the whole system simultaneously?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Say you use it just with the sort of vegan controversy in the Swedish case study, but say there's like a system that's maybe, or an issue a bit more that has multiple controversies, for example.
Yeah, thanks for asking. Yes, I think that's often, of course, it's also a simplified representation of the Swedish case study to only talk about one controversy. There were, of course, a lot of, I think I see Rash is also attending, who's the monitor of the Swedish case study, can confirm that there were definitely more issues than just this one. So I think it can definitely be applied to multiple controversies, and you will often also see that there are multiple issues playing a role. Maybe not every issue arising in a co-innovation context is an issue of trust. However, I do think that it can definitely be applied to several because the boxes are quite open, and it's not necessarily only one issue at a time. However, I do think that in these kind of complex settings, it's always like my approach would always be to kind of start with a very prominent controversy first, see what is actually there, try to unpack that before maybe moving on to the next, although you will often see that they are interrelated, but you have to, I would say that in a context like this, you usually have to start somewhere. And there is quite often one topic or one issue that is kind of jumping out as, okay, this needs attention first. And so I think that usually it will be quite clear in a context like, okay, this issue will first go into and apply this framework to, but the framework can be applied to any kind of issue. And yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, a warm welcome for Anita from Case Study 19, and then I give the floor to Eureka because he posted a question about Case Study 19 in the chat. Can you repeat it?
Yes, thank you, Barbara, for your presentation. It's interesting to hear how you've been. I was wondering to what extent you see the attitude of the participants towards the controversy or to veganism or the vegan market change, or did you position your case study differently vis-a-vis the controversy?
Yeah, I definitely also invite Anita and Rash to answer alongside with me. I do have, from my experiences with the interviews that I did and also the meetings that I attended after these first meetings that I discussed in the presentation, I definitely saw a more openness. So more of a curiosity, for example, to dishes, and to recipes, and more openness, definitely, but not suddenly. It's not as if the farmers were suddenly, I'll become vegan or something like that. But I do have the feeling that there was more openness towards this. Although one of the main participants who was having a vegan diet himself, still very further into the project, was still telling me, oh, I'll just leave that information out. I'm not sharing with the others that I'm eating vegan. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe Anita or Raj wants to add something to that.
I think this is Raj. I could say a few words on that. I mean, our case study has never been on veganism. It has been, the position of the case study is to increase the production and consumption of locally produced legumes. So there can be so we never target veganism, but we try to target also the people, I mean, who are eating meat or who are producing meat products to go together with to increase the production of more legumes and also more consumption. So the position of case study has not changed, but yeah, of course, we had some farmers who feel that when we discuss about promoting more legumes as a protein source, then they might feel a little threatened that their business, dairy sector or a meat sector, their meat producing farms will get affected. But we haven't changed the position of the case study, because we think that these two, as Barbara has mentioned, can exist side by side. Of course, we can reduce our consumption of meat, or we can reduce the import of plant proteins that we are importing from countries where the production system is not environmentally and socially sustainable. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say. Thanks.
I can add one thing too. This is Anita Gunnarsson. I was just working with the technical thing to change from the iPhone to computer when the last question was put. So I'm not 100% sure, but what was the question about? But one thing that I would like to add to your presentation that I think was very good, Barbara, is that an important detail, you could call it, to having the possibility to really get as much trust as possible, is that the big Swedish nature protection organization that is part of this project, they have very clear statement that grazing animals is very important for biological diversity. So they are not having the goal to have all vegans in Sweden. And I think that have been really, really important. It would have been much more problematic if they were really against all kind of animal meat. So that was what I wanted to add.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Anita. That's, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I see a compliment and a link from Ellen Bulton.
Oh, yeah.
And start from Eureka, but are there any other questions to be posted now?
Well, if I can, I have another question, but I wanted to leave the floor a bit. But I was wondering, I started to type it, but then how this relates when you focus on an issue in this framework, how it relates to when you focus more on stakeholder analysis, interest of different people. You get some of the issues out of it, but maybe you said something about it before because I just joined later. But how would you see what kind of insights and interventions, how that would be different?
Yeah, I think thanks, Eureka. It's always good to compare, and then that always helps to clarify, I think. So I think that what is in, so to kind of a traditional RIO actor, system and actor analysis versus having this more trust-based approach, so to say, I think that a lot of things that come out would have, so certain things that come out would have also come out doing a more traditional a more standard RIO approach. However, I think that the trust, the trust focus also brings out this more emotional dimension. The kinds of questions that I asked was also like, during interviews, for example, was also like, what are you afraid of? It's very much, so I think it, for a part, brings out more this emotional dimension and this focus on expectations. So what is actually being expected currently, and how does this relate to these experiences of uncertainty and vulnerability? So I think that that's, I would say that that's the kind of the difference. And it's also not exclusive. So I think that what we did in the project was definitely a more broader, kind of more broadly looking at the needs. However, I think that for the analysis of the role of trust, this is the method, so to say.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I know, yeah.
Okay.
I think
Right.
it's a nice extra element to think of, like the maybe more personal position in that teams.
Mhm.
Okay, Barbara, we still have
Yeah.
10 minutes of golden time left.
Yeah, nice.
Do you have like a question you really want to pose to the people here?
Well, yes, I think so. What I thought I'd use a little bit this webinar because I'm still working. So definitely on the kind of the final part where I was describing also the takeaways and looking at, hey, how can you actually learn this skill? What does it actually consist of? This is something that is still very much a work in process also in my head. And I'm very interested in kind of feedback on what I presented there, and to also hear a bit. So I thought, in case there would not be so many questions, we could take the time to think about situations in your work, maybe where trust played out. But I think it's nicer to leave it a bit open. I see Len also has a question, so I would like feedback on the final part. But maybe let's first go to Len's question.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I'm not too late with this. If I remember correctly, case study 19 had some knowledgeable actors that already worked together during the field projects before DiverIMPACTS. And I was wondering if that had some consequences for the trust and so the bonding social capital in that network, and how that may have influenced further collaborative practices within the case study, as opposed to maybe case study 3 or case study 21.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so case study 19, definitely. And this is also something that I mentioned when I was explaining the RIO method, like you never start from complete scratch. There's always already a context that is present and a history that is present. I think in case study 19, there were groups that had already previously worked together. So for example, the researchers and several of the farmers present already had a longer lasting collaboration. Also, farmers had like this self-organized kind of farmer exchange group, of which several farmers were present. However, what was new was the context in which also this nature protection organization that Anita just mentioned in her contribution was completely new. So there were the setting that we were in, there were both existing bonds and new bonds. I think it's not so different in that sense from the other two case studies that I looked at, because, for example, in the case study of case study 21 in Belgium, this was also really inside of the organic agriculture sector in Flanders. And also a lot of the farmers already knew each other, so that it had a bit, I will not explain now in too much detail, case study 21, but there was also already existing relations that could be built on, and partly new relations. So I'm not, I think it's always different. Let's put it like this. I think it's always important to be aware of which relations are already existing, and how are they being regarded? Is there a lot of conflict in that relation, or is it a very good working relation before? And that definitely has a lot of influence on the collaboration. However, in this case, as well as in other cases, there's usually also new relations that still have to be established, and that may carry their own assumptions. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Walter, yes.
Thank you, Barbara. That was very nice to hear from you. So there's now a new round of research proposals from all kinds of angles, and there's a lot of emphasis now on European proposals on living labs, and living labs, in the way I perceive them, built on this pre-existing trust. So what do your results tell you about the expectations we can have as project, let's say, engaged researchers to engage with groups of people that maybe identify themselves, or that we identify as living labs, but that do not have these pre-existing relations. So is it within our capacity to foster trust?
Yes, thank you, Walter. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and I think actually the setup of DiverIMPACTS is really interesting in that regard, because I see that a lot of the project leaders of the 25 case studies are actually people that have already a lot of this, what I call tacit knowledge, and that have already kind of a developed intuition for what is present in their in their work fields before they started to run this specific DiverIMPACTS case study. And I think that actually contributed a lot to the projects. So I think that at least it's very useful that in a lot of the case studies that was already the case. And I think we also see that in the cases where that was less the case, there was also more difficulty with the trust process. But I do definitely think it's within our capacity. So I think it's something that already gains a lot from having the attention. So from being aware of this kind of layer of the process of co-innovating or labbing, what is the which verb to attach to that? But I think it's already a very big step and a very important step to be aware of the trust process. And I think that the kind of lenses that the tools that I'm developing in this project also may assist those kind of projects in the future. So I definitely do think it's possible, but I do think collaboration and kind of identifying these spiders in the web, to call them like that, sorry, project leaders, is also part of that skill, I would say. And collaborating with those people that have this position. Yeah.
Others who want to share a question or want to give feedback on how you could use the framework in your work.
Wait, I'll just turn on my camera first. It's me again. I'm also working on well, it's about the interaction between learning and anchoring processes, and social capital is an element in that learning component. And they make the distinction between bonding capital and bridging capital. And I was wondering if this is maybe a distinction that could be of use to your framework also, in the sense that bonding capital could refer to enhancing or strengthening trust within the case study, and bridging capital could refer to, yeah, I suppose if you have like the food jam events, which are promotional activities, I suppose, you know, you could perhaps raise the question of, do such activities strengthen trust between case study actors and outside actors, so to say? Is this something that that you recognize or perhaps already read about in your analysis so far or your research?
Unmute first. Yes, thanks, Len, for the suggestion. I definitely have also read on social capital, however, not on bonding and bridging capital. So that's new for me. Yeah, it is, of course, I think that this kind of distinction is also for me reflected in this difference between this interpersonal and interorganizational interactions and the kind of object of change, which is the wider system. So in a sense, there's such kind of a separation is already going on, but it's of course a different element because it's more about the, rather than me saying, hey, where to look for trust dynamics, look at these in these corners, kind of what you are describing, as I understand from this short introduction that you just gave, is more giving a kind of making sense of what kind of work is that actually, what kind of characterizing, so to say, the process. So yeah, I'm not sure how much I can say on how useful it is right now without knowing more about it, but I would be definitely interested to maybe get some references from you and read into it a bit. Yeah.
Yep, sure.
And also like to hear more about what you're doing with the learning and anchoring. So maybe we should talk anyway soon.
I definitely think there's some room for a little collaboration. So I think that would be helpful.
Nice.
Yep.
Always great to see an exchange coming to your schedule.
Yeah.
Thank you, Barbara, for your enthusiastic story.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Good to see you back again after a leave in DiverIMPACTS.
Yeah.
With an enthusiastic mimic, connecting to people. Great. So actually, one thing, we don't have time anymore for other questions or other discussions. The time is always limited. But one thing that puzzled me during your presentation was actually the step before building trust, like how to deal with people having too much of indifference towards a process of a change, but you want to have them in, but they don't feel that vulnerability or that uncertainty yet. So
great that you asked, Danielle, because that's actually what my next article will be about.
Okay, so we're looking forward. The next one will be somewhere September, so an invitation will follow, and we will do a webinar on the learning history exercise. We will do it at the case study teams this fall. So that will be the next one. For now, I say enjoy summer, enjoy this day, and thank you for joining. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.